This was by far the craziest trade deadline I've ever seen, so I'm definitely excited to talk about some winners and losers. There's absolutely no question whatsoever that the Lakers are the winner of the deadline. They might be the biggest winner in trade deadline history. It's just absurd that the thought of trading someone like Luka Doncic ever went into someone's head. Conditioning concerns and quote-unquote getting ahead of what could have been a tumultuous summer is not close to making this justified. What Nico Harrison just did to the Mavericks fanbase is unexcusable. He was taken advantage of and played like a fiddle by his vacation buddy. Any Luka trade, no matter who was involved, would have been a mistake. But not even testing the market and getting this package has me heavily considering the legitimacy of some of these conspiracy theories. Luka's less than a year removed from leading Dallas to the NBA Finals. Since winning Rookie of the Year in 2019, he's made All-NBA First Team in each and every season. He's a perennial MVP candidate that averaged 34, 10, and 9 last season on amazing efficiency. Anthony Davis is a great player, but only getting Max Christie and a first on top of him for a 25-year-old Luka doesn't come close to adding up. Then after taking candy from a baby, the Lakers' deadline wasn't over. They packaged their recent top pick Dalton Connect, a future first rounder and a swap, all assets they shouldn't have even had available after the Luka deal, and traded for Mark Williams, a 7-footer to help fill the void from Anthony Davis' departure. In just his third season with Charlotte, he's averaging 16 and 10. He's the ideal pick and roll partner for Luka that not only gives them a much more well-rounded lineup in the short term, but at only 23 years old, a lot of upside going forward. Charlotte also walks away from this deal as a winner. They bring in one of the top rookies in this year's class in Connect, a knockdown shooter to play in between two of the highest volume perimeter shooters in the league. They also get a first rounder and a pick swap, somehow more draft capital than Dallas ended up with. Now, like the Lakers, the Mavericks weren't done after making the most egregious, one-sided trade of all time, the greatest thing to happen to Cowboys fans since the Yankees won the World Series. They went on to send Quentin Grimes and a second rounder to Philadelphia for Caleb Martin, a pretty neutral trade for both sides. They're both 3-and-D wings. Grimes is cheaper and younger, but Caleb has proven himself in the playoffs. It was just 2 years ago that he was averaging 19 on 60-49 splits during the Eastern Conference Finals. This deal seems fair. The big game is coming up this weekend, and to make things a little bit more interesting, I had to put together an entry on today's sponsor, PrizePicks, a pick'em platform where by just picking more or less on pretty much any stat from any sport, you can now win up to 1,000 times your entry. My favorite thing about PrizePicks is just all the different promos it feels like they constantly have going on, such as the free square they have for the game. Patrick Mahomes only has to get a single yard. So obviously, that's the first thing going in my entry. I'm hoping for a big passing game on both sides, so I'm also going with Jalen Hurts' passing yards. I'm stacking that with their top pass catchers in AJ Brown and Travis Kelce, and I also decided to go with the more on DeAndre Hopkins and Saquon Barkley. I went power play, so my $20 has a chance to become $490. If you guys haven't checked out PrizePicks yet, if you click the link in the description and use the promo code JIMMER when you sign up, after you play your first entry of at least $5, they're going to hook you up with $50 instantly. Thank you PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. Then it was the De'Aaron Fox trade that came through. San Antonio is undoubtedly one of the biggest winners at this deadline. As expected, Victor Wembanyama has ended their rebuild this season. They're looking at a really solid chance at making the play-in. This past offseason, they brought in Chris Paul and drafted Stephon Castle to give them much needed playmaking and ball handling, but the team still desperately needed more individual creation in the backcourt. They get that here with Fox. You can't really ask for a better fit. He's 27 years old, currently averaging 25, 6, and 5 on the season. An obviously great addition, but it's really the price they paid that solidifies their spot in the winners column. They somehow managed to get a deal done without any of their top young talent, like Devin Vassell or Stephon Castle, being involved. They gave up some first rounders, but that barely put a dent into their draft pick pool. They still have all 3 of their unprotected picks they got from the Hogs, who just got worse at this trade deadline, and have all but one of their own tradable first round selections. The Bulls side of this deal just doesn't make much sense. Yes, LaVine's on a big contract, one that reportedly a year ago made him nearly untradeable, but this season he's been playing some of the best basketball of his career. He's averaging 24, 5, and 5 on ridiculous splits, 51% from the field and 45% from 3. It's hard to see how there wasn't a better option on the table. All they really get from this deal is getting out of LaVine's contract. Yes, they got their first round pick back, which sounds great, but they already possessed the upside of it. It had a top 10 protection. If it didn't convey, it would have deferred to 2026 with a top 8 protection. The same in 2027, and if it still didn't convey, it would have became a second rounder. Then we have Sacramento's side of the deal, which I feel like's gotten a little too much criticism. They got a good amount of draft capital. The Spurs first in 2027, the Timberwolves first in 2031, plus essentially 5 second rounders considering the protection on the Hornets pick. They also get Zach LaVine, whose strong play this season makes it a pretty lateral move on the court, at least in the short term. All the criticism I've seen hasn't factored in at all the potential of a future LaVine trade. There was just no world where we were going to see Sacramento dive headfirst into a tanking rebuild at this deadline. So with that considered, I don't think this was terrible. Then a few days later, we also saw them take some of those assets from the Fox deal, Sidi Sissoko and 2 second rounders, and get Jonas Valanciunas, a deal that at the very least is solid value. Jonas has 2 years left on his deal, getting $10 million a season. One trade I really didn't see coming is the one between the Bucks and Wizards. I really don't see the vision here for Milwaukee. Yes, Chris Middleton is far from the player he once was on both sides of the ball, but Kyle Kuzma right now is having the worst year of his career offensively. He's averaging 15 and 6, shooting 42% from the field and 28% from 3. He brings a little bit of upside to the table, but ultimately I think the Bucks end up as losers. Now, as Kevin O'Connor pointed out, there was a world where this trade would have made a lot more sense. The deal allowed them to get below the second apron, meaning they could aggregate salaries in a trade. Unfortunately, however, the only other deal they got done before the deadline was sending Marjon Beauchamp for Kevin Porter Jr. Now, Washington's side of the deal I think is great. They move on from Kuzma, pick up an interesting young piece in AJ Johnson, and get some draft capital. Right before the deadline closed, they got involved in another deal, taking on Marcus Smart's contract from the Grizzlies and picking up another first-round pick. Overall, I love what they're doing. They're taking advantage of the lack of flexibility some teams have faced with the new CBA. It's a play right out of the Presti playbook. At this stage of the rebuild, just take on contracts for draft capital. Then it was the Jimmy Butler trade that came through. As long as Curry's on this team, the Warriors are going to try and compete. This isn't a move that suddenly pushes them into serious title contention, but it at least gives them a fighting chance. They didn't have to pay a crazy price, and now the timeline is clearer than ever. Curry's 36, Jimmy Butler's 35, and Draymond 34. After the Jimmy Butler extension, all three are under contract for the next 2 seasons. Now, Miami didn't have much leverage at all in this whole Jimmy Butler situation, so ending up with a likely mid-first round selection and Andrew Wiggins, who's still a very solid player in this league that fits well in Miami, isn't a terrible outcome. Jimmy Butler would have walked in the offseason. Now, they get a fine, younger replacement and still have a chance to do something this season as they're currently the 5th seed in the East. In general, this Heat organization has never taken the traditional rebuilding route, so with that considered, I think they're definitely winners here. The next trade to come through the timeline was the Brandon Ingram deal. The Raptors going after Ingram was an interesting decision. They're a young team that's currently a bottom 3 record in the Eastern Conference. The core of Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, and Brandon Ingram is an exciting one, but it's not cheap and likely still lacks the top-end talent. This move also really hurts their chances at the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. But while there is plenty of room to criticize the deal, assuming the Ingram extension isn't ridiculous, they did get a pretty good price. Ingram's 27 years old, averaging 22, 5, and 5 on 47-37 splits. As far as the Pelicans go, they would have really benefited from making this Ingram deal much earlier, but at least they were able to get some kind of draft capital before you would have walked for nothing in a couple months. Now, a team that left the deadline as a clear loser is the Suns, a team that is as all in on the present as you can be. They have close to no young assets or draft capital, yet are currently sitting as just the 10th seed in the West. On top of that, they're just a year out from Kevin Durant becoming a free agent. There were a lot of rumors involving them going into the deadline. Early, it was them going after Jimmy Butler, then it was potentially trading for Kevin Durant. None of those things happened. Instead, they gave up Yusuf Nurkic in a 2026 first to the Hornets for Cody Martin, Micic, and a second-round pick. It's good to get out of Nurkic in his contract, but in the process, the team that already had the worst draft capital position in the league gives up another first-round pick. Now, the trade that probably has the biggest effect on this current season is the deal between the Cavs and Hawks. The Cavs are a blatant winner here. They get more size, defense, and versatility with DeAndre Hunter, who's in the middle of the best season of his career. He's currently averaging 19 and 4, shooting 39% from distance. At the end of the day, this one's simple. They're the top seed in the Eastern Conference, they got better, and they didn't have to give up much. I really just don't get what the Hawks were doing at this deadline. This team isn't in a position to rebuild without a lot of its draft capital, including their first round pick this season. They gave up Hunter for LeVert on an expiring contract, some second rounders and pick swaps that apparently are swaps of swaps in 2026 and 2028. Then they made another deal, sending Bogdanovic, who has struggled this year, to the Clippers for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. A fine deal by itself. I just don't see what the overall goal here was for Atlanta. They didn't get great value for Hunter, and they got worse without having their draft pick to benefit from that. But there it is, my winners and losers from this year's deadline.